Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part 2 of my conversation with Joe Tranquillo from Bucknell University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
You are about to hear part 2 of our conversation with Joe Tranquillo from Bucknell University. Please be sure to listen to our previous episode to hear part 1 of this conversation.
You had previously been a professor first before you went into administration, and
Right.
now being an associate provost. What is that jump like for you? What was the difference? I mean, I know you, by the way, between that you are in, you have been, leading in leadership institutes and had sat on boards and etc. So there's a lot that went in between, being a faculty member and being both
Sure.
faculty member and administrator. But
Yeah.
you want to sort of tell us a little bit of sort of the insight if someone's listening who's perhaps a new faculty member or young
Right.
faculty member, or someone who's maybe thinking about, I've been teaching, but I'm also thinking about, like, how do I create more impact in
Sure.
my institution? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, no answers here, right? I'm one person who followed one path, so it's certainly not the right one. And I will say, it's kind of ironic. You're asking me now to reflect on my career on the spot, right? so this feels actually a little bit selfish.
Do you want a card? Do you want a card?
No, that would be great. Yeah, you get to pick a card, then I have to do it live, right here. So I think that, again, there's a lot of pieces to dissect in this, but you're right. It's a transition, and it's not one that happened like a switch. I've had a number of, I would say, part-time, half-time, right, pieces of administrative roles that I've kind of gained over time. I think a lot of the skill sets that I use as an administrator, many of them, not all of them, were kind of built during things that I did as a professor and did as co-directors of, other places. There have been some surprises, which is, that's fine, right? That's part of the learning process, is you learn a new thing, a new skill set. So I don't think it was the skills per se were the thing that was surprising, or what the shift was. I think many of those, right? They probably wouldn't have hired me if they thought I didn't have those. I think, and again, I'm kind of a System Z kind of person. I think the biggest shift has been one in the way I think about impact. As a classroom professor, there's a much more limited group of folks that you can impact. That's usually the students who are in your class or the folks who are your advisees. But you actually, luckily, this is one of the affordances of being in academia, is that you can have a pretty significant impact on that group. And if you see that something's not working, you can switch gears pretty quickly. If you decide that you want to give a particular student individual attention or flexibility, you have a lot of autonomy over how you do that. Again, not infinite, but you have autonomy. And so the time scale on which you can be adaptive and you can learn is pretty fast. You can adapt that, not infinitely quickly, but pretty quickly.
Lots of iterations. You can sort of try
lots
it
of
one
iterations.
time,
You
try
can
it
do
again, try it again, try it again.
Exactly. You can learn quickly, especially, and this is a plug to new instructors out there, is, pick some small things that you can do. I don't care if it's muddiest points or whatever, right? Like, pick something that's not grand and totally changing your whole class, and repeat it 5 or 6 times in a course, and you'll get better at it each time you do it. You'll improve on that one particular thing, and along the way, you'll gain some intuition about how to meet your students sort of where they are. The big switch has been, the higher up in the administration you go. So this is, department chair or dean or whatever, right? The higher up you sort of move. In some ways, the less autonomy you have over being able to make a quick change that's going to have an impact right away. And that's because there's lots more constituents, there's lots more stakeholders. What may be great for the thermodynamics class as a university-wide policy may be awful for the folks in theater and dance. And so you have lots of different competing interests, and finding something that will be a good policy for everyone is not simple, and it goes very slowly because you have to check in with all of those groups.
Right.
So I think that's the downside to some degree. The upside is that, and this is the mindset shift, is that the potential for having a wonderful impact
Mhm.
is now much broader, right? You've
Right.
just expanded the impact you can have, and there's obviously a risk in that, right? If you make a mistake, right? Well, it's a mistake for everyone.
You
And
also have a negative impact also
you
potentially.
can have the negative
Right.
impact, and the dilemma is that unlike in a class where you might be able to undo it
Mhm.
and say, you know what, all right, I take it back. It's not as easy to take those things back, right?
Right.
This is the difference between turning around the small ship versus turning around the big ship, right? Is
Right.
it just takes longer to make
Right.
course
Right.
corrections.
Right. It's harder to just do, oh, let's try this
Right.
differently, because
Now,
you may not be able to keep doing that over and over. Right.
absolutely. And,
Mhm.
frankly, you had mentioned the D school. I had gotten to spend about a year. I wasn't embedded for the whole year in the D school, but I got to spend some time in the D school. And I took so many things away from that. I mean, it was so much fun to get to play with those folks, and not just play with the folks at the D school, but play with the other people from other places in the world who like to play with the D school, right? So
Right, right.
it's a
Let's
magnet,
wait,
right?
wait,
For
wait. Let's tell people like D
oh,
school
sure.
at Stanford, so people know what we're talking about in
Yep.
case they're not aware.
Yep. D School at Stanford. You could go look it up. My take is for those of you who haven't seen the IDEO shopping cart video, you should go check that out. I think it's on YouTube. And IDEO was one of the design firms that was basically really pivotal in bringing the D School about. And there's a line in that video where I think it's David Kelly says, this is where the crazies live. Um, and I think that wasn't just applying to IDEO. I think it was applying to the D school as well.
Mhm.
And when he said that, he didn't mean crazy like we're thinking of things that are just stupid and silly and all of that.
Mhm.
They were we want to look at things. You mentioned before, look at something and see something different in it.
Mhm.
That's what they do, and I think that there's a reason why they don't exist really under any specific department at Stanford,
Mhm.
because they're meant to be that mix of
Mhm.
the folks who want to do things differently, see things differently. So
Right,
it was so much fun to be embedded in the D school.
right. And they are the ones who really coined the term design thinking, which
Right,
is now had had impact in from in industry to
right.
academics, etc. In all kinds of ways. But yeah, so you had this incredible sort of experience there.
Sure. And I think that again, I took lots and lots and lots of different bits and pieces away from the D school. I'm trying to even think which one I want to which one I want to pull
Mhm.
out. I think it was the biggest thing that I think I took away that's applicable to my job, and it goes back to that. What do you do
Mhm.
with the ship that's too big to actually, right?
To be nimble
Turn,
and yeah,
right?
right.
You can't turn the whole ship, or if you do, it's going to take a long time. And I think the analogy that I would use with that is to them to say, go to the captain and ask if you can have a little bit of time and a couple of people on the ship to take out a rowboat.
Mm.
Right? And
Exploring the area first.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, go
Mhm.
explore a little bit first, right? And we're not going to try to explore with the whole ship. We're going to
Mhm.
explore with a couple of rowboats and see what we can
Right.
find.
Right.
And so I think that the dilemma is, and this is for anyone listening, is it always kind of feels like you're driving the big ship, right? If
Mhm.
even if you're a
Right.
classroom
Right.
instructor, it feels like you're driving the big ship. If you're a
Mhm.
department chair, it feels like you're driving a big ship. No matter what level you're at, it always feels like you're driving a big ship.
Mhm.
So, are there ways that you can send out some rowboats, right? Try some
Yeah.
things that are they may or may not succeed, right?
Mhm.
And again, this isn't just throw stuff at the wall, right? I mean, it's explore smartly, right? Use data, right? All of that. It's not to just
You
say
should have
send
a
them out.
hunch somewhere. You should
Yeah,
know, hey,
have
looks
a
like
theory.
something's happening, right?
Exactly. Have some ideas, have some directions,
If the
but then
Titanic had sent out the rowboats before, then things
right.
might have been different.
Yeah, right, exactly. And again, I think that's actually a great analogy, right? This isn't go explore thousands of miles off of the ship. It's explore kind of in the vicinity, right? Because you're not
Mhm.
going to steer the ship somewhere completely different
Right.
all at once. So I think what I would encourage folks to do, and again, reflection and lots of other pieces are built into this, is can you build in small prototypes and small iterations so that you can iterate a little bit more quickly?
Mhm.
And one of the things, and I'm saying this here now, you all can check back in to see if I've been successful at some point in time, is one of the giant boats in higher ed, and you mentioned it before, is curriculum.
Yeah.
Once a curriculum becomes put in place, it's yeah, at best we might change it every 10 years. It's
Right.
just
Right.
like it's there, and the only way
Yeah.
that we change it is at our next accreditation cycle, the accreditors say you have to change your
They really
curriculum, right?
hated it.
Right,
Right.
yeah, right,
As
right.
long as
And
they're okay with it, you're not touching it because
yeah,
you don't
right.
want
Yeah,
to have that
yeah,
meeting with every faculty member going, no
yeah.
way. No.
It's painful
Right.
to get consensus. It's hard. There's going to be folks who are going
Right.
to have to give some things up and change their own direction, right? All of that. Um, so here's one thing that I would love to see happen in higher ed, and there are places that do this, is could you imagine bringing in a group of 100 students and they are guaranteed at the onset that if you try this experimental curriculum, you're going to graduate. You actually don't have to take the existing curriculum. You're going to take this other
Hmm.
trial one
Interesting. Yeah.
instead.
Sure.
And we're not going to screw you at the end, right?
Mhm.
Where it's not like we're going to say, "Oh, sorry, now you got to take another year," because that's not fair to them.
Mhm.
But it would allow you to try out some ideas, try out some bits and pieces.
Right.
To some degree, I would say this is almost a little bit of what some schools do with an honors program.
Sure.
Is they're right they have a smaller cohort
Mhm.
that's easier to sort of change things, and they can try things out. And in the ideal world, things that work really well in the honors college, they would then figure out how to scale. And
Right.
that, again, that's not a perfect recipe. That's not easy to do,
Right.
but it is a way to try that, that
Mhm.
rowboat
And sometimes it's
version.
self-selective too, because
Right.
you might say, hey, this experimental piece includes, for example, a lot of working with the community. Well, guess
Right.
what? Some students, maybe they go, I just want to go to class, do
Yep.
my exams, and I'm happy.
Well,
They may not be the one who would
yeah.
sign up. Right.
Well, and I want to connect this back to another piece, because you mentioned being engaged in the community, or the student who says, I just want to take my classes.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's the same student, right?
True,
They
true.
just
Yeah.
want to do their classes because they want to be so engaged in the community. And this applies to
Right.
athletes. This applies, right? I mean, there's lots of different
Yep.
groups that can apply to. Is that the piece of learning that they're going to really take away and they're going to remember is going to be something that, yes, they'll take things away from their curriculum, but the piece that will resonate with them throughout their entire life may not be what they thought it was, and they may be learning things in other realms. So this goes back to the whole idea of curriculum. It goes back to the idea of being liberally educated. It goes back to that three-part
Yeah.
framework:
Yeah.
is how can you unite a campus around something?
Mhm.
And again, it doesn't have to be my three pieces, right? The genuine caring for others, the
Yeah.
steward of the environment, and the continuous investment. It could be three or four, or whatever, different pillars.
Mhm.
But can you get civic engagement and your global education off campus study, and right, all of these other different groups, all of the residential education, right? So lots of schools, there's a lot of different bits and pieces that frankly are not working with the same framework. And because many of the learning objectives of the university really only are paid attention to by the faculty, I can almost guarantee you at most schools, if you asked folks in student life or athletics or global ed,
Mhm.
right, this is maybe an overstatement, what are the university learning goals? They go, I don't know, right? Like, we don't pay attention to those really. What would it look like for a coach
Mhm.
an athletic coach to be thinking about how to build those relationships and thinking about how your team is this thing and how do you be a great steward and how do you actually continuously improve,
Right.
maybe not intellectually but athletically, right? So again, it
And it
would
would
help.
have, by the way, taken care of some of those ethical pieces that might have
Right.
come into play, because I think that the one of the things that I talked a little bit about, how businesses have done this,
Hmm.
a few years ago, and I want to say that it is, the Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh had sort of really made that more popular.
Right.
So a lot of companies started having core values, where
Hmm.
he basically said, "Look, we wanted to make, you know." He wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. We wanted to delight our
Yep.
customers, which include if they want to call us at Zappos and wanted to talk to us because they wanted advice on XYZ, we're going to use our core value, which does not say get rid of them as soon as possible, because that's how we make, generate more,
Right.
handle more call volumes. And as
Right.
a result, though, the company became ultra successful,
Hmm.
right? And I think that those core values is kind of what you were talking about. It's a
Exactly.
layer that sits between um, the that mission statement, which might be very grand,
Hmm.
and then the sort of program level outcomes where it starts to get perhaps too granular and maybe
Right.
too, but also includes a lot of subject content subject,
Sure.
areas. But it's sort of a simple enough set of, like you said, a handful at best,
Hmm.
a core sort of, lens and values where, hey, we're about to start this new program. How does it if I run
Exactly.
through these three
Right.
questions, how do we are we still doing that? Is it
Right.
still, and are we giving an opportunity for people to deeply care and genuinely care for each other, being a steward for our environment
Hmm.
and investing in ourselves? And if so, then it probably fits our model, right?
I think this is, you're on one end of the design side and I've been on the other end, right, as an engineering designer. I think this is exactly 100% right on, right. Is a lot of great designers kind of practice sort of a push pull between backwards design, which is I kind of have this vision of what I want out in the future, but then you got to find a way to actually get there, and that's the iterative process where you make small steps
Yeah.
and you might actually realize through that process that your vision was wrong, right? So
And you surprise
it's
yourself.
it's
Right.
it's a it's a push pull between having that grand
Yeah.
blueprint that you have, but then being able to not rigidly stick
Yeah.
to it if you learn in the process that it was the wrong thing to do. um, but I think that the point is that the only way that you can simultaneously do those two things and have them in tension, because they will always be in tension, right? You'll have these moments where you go like,
Yeah.
should we deviate from the blueprint or not, right? And the problem is you're never going to get the answer from your process per se, and you're not going to get it from the blueprint, and you're not going to, right? So the question is, what is it that's going to guide you in thinking about when you deviate from the blueprint?
Mhm.
And I think you're absolutely right. There can be some core grounding principles that help you at least make decisions that are in
Mhm.
alignment over time.
Right.
An example of this is, and it's kind of it's a goofy exercise, and we haven't exactly done it here at Bucknell, um, but it's one that I'm really looking forward to doing. Is we have a number of, like many other schools, programs that are run by our institution somewhere abroad. So we have a Bucknell in Spain and a Bucknell in London and a Bucknell in Ghana and right. Like, so we have kind of a base there, and it's something that typically someone from Bucknell, a staff member, a faculty member, goes there, and a group of students will go with them each semester. And there's probably some relationship where students from that place come there. So there's legal contract and all of that. So we have a number of these programs. Bucknell in blank. The question I proposed to the group was, and this is going to sound really silly, what if we were building a Bucknell in Pluto?
Mhm.
Right?
Sure.
On the planet Pluto, right? It's a hypothetical exercise. We know we're not going to actually do that.
Yeah.
Um, but what would be the things that we would need to think about? And, I'm not talking about like, terraforming the planet and
Yeah.
creating a
Right.
nuclear power plant, right? But like, what would be the things that we would put there? And the entire point of that exercise was, Why are we going there? What do we need to build on the ground? How are we going to actually sustain it? Right. And you begin thinking about all the pieces. But as you're designing that, as you're building your blueprint for what that program's going to be, let's make sure that we're sticking to those core pieces.
Mm.
Because if we get part of the way down the road and realize that we're in an impossible situation and we're not going to be able to fulfill the goals, those higher level goals, then we shouldn't do it. Right?
It's a
Um,
really wonderful, actually, it's a really interesting exercise because it tests also your values.
yep.
If those values are working at that, such a dramatically different sort of context,
Right.
it pushes you to the limit. And in fact, it reminds me when I was at teaching at Rhode Island School of Design. One of the things that our school's privileged to be able to do was to work with NASA, and NASA
Wow.
had worked with a bunch with our industrial design program, and and so one of the projects I remember they were talking about creating sort of what the interior of a space shuttle, how is it going to function,
Hmm.
and as an industrial designer, you're creating objects, right? Like IDEO would be,
Sure.
except that if learning content was going to be the thing,
Hmm.
it would be really weird because first of all, gravity doesn't exist. So
Right.
everything that
Right.
you take, like your cup having a flat bottom that sits on a
Doesn't
table,
work.
doesn't work. Whoops, right? And so suddenly it's almost like, oh, we are no longer taking the cup, we don't learn that a cup has to have a flat bottom.
Right.
We learn that why is that the case? Why is that
Yep.
so important? And then you kind of have to sort of, understand it at a deeper level. So suddenly
Yep.
you have a more respect when you actually look at a cup on Earth and why it's designed in this way, right? Isn't that so interesting?
I love it, and this again goes back to that idea of lenses.
Mhm.
And again, somebody who's associated with the D School, Tina Seelig, has all sorts of fun things that she does, and questions that she'll prompt designers with. They're things like, um, and again, they're meant to get you out of ruts. What would you do if you only could make this for $1? Right? I don't care if it's a space shuttle, redesigning a space shuttle. Like,
Right.
what would you
Do it.
do?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
What about if this was going to be for a 1 year old or for right? So you
Mhm.
you keep kind of playing with things, and I think to a point you made much earlier, most of those questions, you're going to come up with ridiculous answers that make absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Mhm.
But that's not the point, right?
Right.
The point is to come up with the one thing that might disrupt your thinking.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I don't know if you've seen Edward de Bono. He did like the six hats thinking technique, and he was the lateral thinking guy and all of that.
Mhm.
He came up with a whole bunch of different ideas of how you can actually get out of ruts. And one of them is called provocation. And again, I don't even think the book is out in print anymore, but it's got also a whole methodology that you follow. And what I loved about it was you go through these exercises and do them not for the idea that you're going to have now in the moment. It's the one you're going to get in the shower. It's the one you're going to get a week from now on vacation. It's the one, right?
Right.
It,
Right.
and again, going back to that junk drawer idea, right? It's kind
Right.
of like provocation is rattle the junk
Mhm.
drawer, right?
Right.
To make it more likely that something might
Mhm.
come out.
Right.
And that, it can't be completely planned, but that
Right.
and he literally called it of unsettling your mind, right?
Yeah.
Unsettling kind of the way you think about things. And ironically, one of the examples that he used was cups. And it's great. And he one of the techniques was take something and sort of ruin it, right? Make it so that it's like the stupidest thing ever. And one of the examples was take a cup and put a round bottom on it.
Mhm. Right.
It's like, well, that's stupid, right? That makes no.
Mhm.
It's gonna fall. It's gonna tip over. But then the that was the provocation. But where he went with it was, well, okay, it'll tip over. That means that people won't want to put it down, right? They'll want to hold
Mhm.
it.
Right.
Okay, well, there may be situations where you don't want people to put cups down just anywhere. Oh, you're having a party. You don't want people to just
Mhm.
put their cups down anywhere.
Right.
So what could you do? Well, you make a holder. and you build it into something, right? So now that cup will only fit in certain places
Yeah.
that you get to control where folks would actually put things down. So again, it's kind of one of those, it would be a stupid solution, but
Mhm.
there are some situations where it would make sense to have
Such as
round
a
bottom cups.
such as a test tube,
That's exactly right. Yep.
right?
That is what a test tube is.
Right. And so let me. I want to go drive the conversation to. I think we're gonna go way over, but I wanted to
That's
like.
okay. That's okay.
I want to ask you one thing because typically in these conversations we don't necessarily talk a lot about e-portfolios,
Hmm.
as a mandate, but I am so fascinated by what you've set up so far, which has,
Hmm.
you have these, what does a new set of values may look like,
Hmm.
for students when you think about new curriculum, new models, and new programs. You also have sort of this idea of students, having to work with purpose, and how that might engage with these different ways of, sort of thinking about the world, and then they
Hmm.
inform each other. We talk about reflection. um, it feels like to me that, um, I mean, I would love to hear about your sort of vision and insights on how all of that manifests itself in all themselves into e-portfolios.
Sure.
Um, I know that you're also working with, AAC and U on the ePortfolio Institute.
Right.
Um, I imagine you're probably talking about stuff like that there as well.
Sure.
Do you want to share a little bit of that, even knowing that maybe it's work in progress?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, I think it's the wonderful part about any of the high impact practices is that there's kind of some core ideas and best practices within each one, but there's no right way to do it. And so what I think has been interesting to dissect at Bucknell, and this has been, we've kind of just started in terms of our launch, but it's been a topic that's been around for at least 20 years, and there have been kind of starts and fits, and things would start in one place, but then kind of die, and then they'd start in another place, and they'd kind of die. This has been the first coherent university-wide kind of full force. We're going, more or
Mhm.
less all in on e-portfolios. And I think as part of that, what needed to be clarified was the why. Why? What is it that we're doing this for? And there were a lot of possible whys that we had to explore, and that again they could all be just fine. Some it's a fantastic assessment tool. We can collect artifacts from students, and then we have them all in one place, and it makes it easier to kind of do that. Um, it can also be a great resource for students in terms of going out and searching for internships and research experiences, and even explaining to their parents, right? Like this is what I did. Isn't this a cool project, right?
Mhm.
Um, that's a very outward looking,
Yeah. Mhm.
using the e-portfolio as a technological tool for the dissemination of your work. Totally fine. And there are some disciplines that like you have to do that, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
part of education. In the arts, often if you're going to go into the arts, you need a portfolio, and in engineering as well, in architecture too.
Mhm.
Um, I think what we did was to acknowledge that those are all there, but that the core why of what we wanted to do was developmental. And it was to allow students to have a place where they could see their growth and development happening. They don't have a lot of instances where they can do that. It happens, but again, it happens unintentionally by accident. We kind of, this is the snarky version of me. When it comes to things like connecting the dots between all of their experiences and all that, reflecting on them, we kind of do this, right? And I'm crossing my fingers right now for those who can't see it, right? We kind of say, if we put them in this great, rich, amazing, immersive experience, and we give them these experiences, we trust that they're going to connect the dots for themselves and all that. To me, the pedagogy of e-portfolios is the process of putting it together, the process of curating it, the process of making decisions about
Mhm.
what you put in and how much and how you actually write about it. You may never show it to anyone. And it's one of the things that I love about Digication is that you can have multiple portfolios. You could have one that's just for you, and it's it's your place to explore, to try things, right? To go back to our earlier analogy, it's your rowboats, right? If you
Mhm.
want to have 5 or
Right.
6 of them and explore different career paths, to see how the things that you have done up to this point might send you along those trajectories, you could do that. You could use it as an exploratory tool.
Right.
Um, so I think that's more in the vein of what we've been working on, along with a variety of other initiatives. I would say very high level initiatives that we have. Some of those we've already talked about in bits and pieces, and that is, how do we get to see students? How do we help students see that they're learning everywhere on this campus?
Mhm.
They're learning in the conversations they're having with others, faculty, staff, their fellow students, in dining halls. If they're on an athletic team, that their coach is a resource. That they're right. So, and this kind of goes on and on and on of
Yeah.
how can they view the whole environment as a place that's helping them learn. Right now, some of them do it naturally, and
Mhm.
and some of them don't. And so I think, as a pedagogy, ePortfolios hopefully is a place for different types of learners to see that integration of their all that they're getting here.
This concludes part 2 of our conversation with Joe Tranquillo from Bucknell University. To hear part 3, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Jeff Yan and Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.